Double agents. Taiwan arrests 2 military veterans for spying in as many weeks. Power grab. Fears in Taiwan that opposition parties' budget cuts will send energy prices soaring. Police have busted a string of crypto scams, but President Lai says they need to do more. Plus, tying the knot. Bangkok celebrates the first same-sex weddings in Southeast Asia. Good evening and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. A retired Taiwanese lieutenant general has been indicted on espionage charges. He's now the highest-ranking veteran to be charged with spying for China. As Chris Gorin reports, this adds to the growing list of espionage cases involving the country's retired service members.
This is retired Taiwanese Lieutenant General Gao Anguo. He's now the highest-ranking retired serviceman Taiwan has indicted for spying for China. Prosecutors have charged Gao and 5 others with violating the National Security Act. It's the latest in a growing number of espionage cases involving retired military personnel. Prosecutors say that Gao formed a group promoting unification with China, and that Beijing paid nearly $300,000 for tasks such as using drones to identify possible invasion sites on Taiwan's northern coast. The group allegedly even promised armed support to China if it were to invade.
那些企图制造分裂、阻挡统一的势力无论内外，注定将在这股不可逆的洪流中被淹没。
Gao has made no secret of his support for Taiwan's unification with China, often posting pro-unification commentary on his YouTube channel. But for his concrete actions to assist in unification, prosecutors are seeking a sentence of 10 years in prison. It's the second case to be made public in as many weeks. Earlier this month, an indictment was made public against retired military veteran and politician Chu Hong-yi. Prosecutors also charged him with carrying out reconnaissance for China, including on the unofficial U.S. embassy in Taipei. He was also allegedly assembling teams to carry out attacks during a Chinese invasion. Taiwan's defense ministry says the impacts of these 2 cases are limited.
目前并没有现役官兵的涉案，也没有重大的国防机密资讯泄露的一个状况。
Prosecutors declined to comment to TaiwanPlus on whether the 2 cases are connected. It's unclear whether such cases, which have much in common, are part of a coordinated effort by China. But with so many cases involving the country's veterans now coming to light, many here are naturally concerned. Klein Wong and Chris Gorin for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's defense ministry reported 35 Chinese aircraft and 6 naval vessels operating around the country in the 24 hours leading up to Thursday morning. 27 of those aircraft crossed the median line of the Taiwan Strait. The military says at least 2 drones circled Taiwan, while other aircraft entered the Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ. Now, this area is not Taiwan's airspace, but rather it's used as a buffer zone for defensive purposes. This latest ADIZ breach is the largest single-day incursion so far this year. Taiwan's premier had strong words for the record spending cuts approved by the opposition-controlled legislature, calling them suicidal.
我们会依照这个条文来进行我们的后续救济行为，因为面对这种无差别的攻击，我们没有办法说自杀式的删减。
Taiwan's opposition coalition voted to cut around $6 billion from the government's 2025 budget, including nearly $2 billion from defense. They argue that the cut is necessary to eliminate wasteful spending. But the premier says the cuts may mean that some agencies could be forced to cut back or even terminate services. Now, among those cuts was a $3 billion blow to Taiwan's state-owned power company. And this could see electricity prices rise, and some people are even urging the government to bring back nuclear energy. Tiffany Wong explains.
With each motion, these machines are making money for Taiwan's industries, but also consuming huge amounts of electricity. The cost to run them may increase soon, as the state-owned power company Taipower faces a $3.1 billion hit to its budget for subsidies. Those extra funds had kept prices stable for big manufacturers and ordinary consumers alike. Now, large energy users are worried about what the higher cost of electricity could look like.
台电负担会加重啊。那如果它要继续走下去，只有两条路，一个是涨全民的电价，那另外一个是台电继续去举债。
Energy resilience is a major concern for the country, which imports nearly all of its energy. And Taipower says it needs the subsidies to replace old equipment, prevent outages, and implement energy-efficient guidance. But by the end of 2024, Taipower had accrued $12.8 billion in losses, and opposition parties say the government is pursuing the wrong energy policy. Now, with significant budget cuts, Taipower must decide where to slash spending. And while large electricity consumers may take a hit first, residential users are worried about potential price hikes too.
一定要这样子，让我们民生负担更重嘛。明年的民生预期是很紧的，而且我们薪水又没有涨，那企业主一定会反弹啊。那我们老百姓有反弹有用吗？
现在已经就是蛮缺电的吧？对，所以如果预算有删减的话，可能用电量没有减少，还是会担心电价上涨。
But others had mixed feelings about the cuts and their potential impact.
删除应该删除，可是不要删那么多。你让它台电倒了也不是办法啊。
当然我们是支持政府的嘛，对不对？但是去买的电价应该是合理的电价。我们是看到很多的报纸登导说台电去跟民间买的那个电价都很贵。
The chair of Taiwanese electronics manufacturer Pegatron suggests bringing back nuclear power to take care of the country's energy needs. But nuclear is a non-renewable energy source that the ruling Democratic Progressive Party has been trying to wean the country off of. And the last reactor is scheduled to shut down in May. Some environmental researchers say a return to nuclear could set the country back on its energy goals to achieve a mix of natural gas, coal, and renewable sources, or even increase costs in the long run.
核能机组它如果是要去延役的话，其他成本来讲都会飙到是将近是3块以上，甚至是逼近4块。它其实又要再有一个5年的整个审查时间。
The government has been phasing out nuclear reactors in accordance with a rule that only grants them a 40-year operating license. And Taipower says extending the one for the final nuclear reactor is not an option. With the impact of the budget cuts on consumers yet to be decided, Taipower and the government will need to keep searching for solutions to the country's energy woes. Andy Xue and Tiffany Wong for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's legislature has been fighting over more than just the country's budget. Starting early last year, legislators brawled over bills on the power to investigate the executive branch and reforming the Constitutional Court. For more on the current political landscape, Alec McDonald spoke to Karis Templeman, a research fellow at the Hoover Institution.
Karis, in your last article, you mentioned that Taiwan might be entering a period of constitutional crises. Could you explain a little bit about what you mean by this term?
Well, so the most imminent problem is that the Constitutional Court right now in Taiwan does not have a full membership. So there are only 8 justices of the 15 in the court who hold office right now. And the crisis is that the legislature just passed a bill requiring a quorum of at least 10 justices to meet to hear any sort of challenges to laws based on their constitutionality. So we're in a position where the court can't actually rule on anything that the legislature does now. And despite that, the executive branch has asked the court to go ahead and rule on the constitutionality of the law that makes it impossible for them to rule on constitutionality of laws. So we're kind of caught in a limbo here. And so the court could decide that they have the right to review this law anyway, and then the legislature, I imagine, will probably react in a very harsh way towards the court.
Critics of this bill have stated that the KMT and TPP are politicizing the Constitutional Court, by punishing them for rulings against bills which those two parties earlier favored. Can you talk a little bit about this political division right now?
Yeah, I think there's some deeply problematic aspects to the decision to raise the threshold for a valid court decision. The timing is obviously suspicious. The introduction of the raising of the threshold of that bill, it actually occurred right after the court narrowed the scope of Taiwan's death penalty. And that was a perfectly valid thing for the court to do. There's another way you could have designed this law if you weren't trying to punish the court, which is to say this will take effect in 2 years from now, right? And that will give us time to seat new justices. The current ability of the court to actually function won't be affected in the near term. But the opposition chose, I think, to take a more confrontational approach, and I don't think you can read it any other way. I think this was retaliatory against the court, and I think that is, unfortunately, a pretty direct attack on judicial independence in Taiwan.
One of the other key points of tension is the formation of the budget, which has seen key portions slashed. Can you talk a little bit about how this plays into current political tensions inside the legislature?
Let me start with the observation that the legislature does have the legal power to freeze or cut budgets. And that's really the one kind of clear constitutional authority they have over the executive branch. I actually think I fault the Lai administration and President Lai himself for not recognizing the new political dynamic that is now in Taiwan, the new facts on the ground. If you don't have a majority in the legislature, you got to talk to the opposition, right? So I've criticized the DPP, now let me criticize the opposition as well. The cuts that they've made have just been vindictive. There hasn't been a kind of clear rationale for going after certain parts of the government other than there are agencies that they just don't like, and they want to send a message to the DPP.
That was Karis Templeman, research fellow at the Hoover Institution. Police have helped return over $300,000 US in stolen money to several cryptocurrency scam victims. But the problem of crypto fraud is big and slippery, and some police feel that official pressure on them to stamp it out entirely has gone too far. John Van Trieste reports.
Police arrest a suspected scammer, part of a big push to tackle a wave of fraud that's hit Taiwan in recent years. But by the government's count, most scammers never face justice. President Lai Ching-te says fewer than 10% of recent fraud cases have even been cracked, and he wants police to try harder. Some of the toughest cases to crack involve cryptocurrency, favored by criminals as a tool for laundering money. Police have been able to regain some funds thanks to a partnership with 4 exchanges launched last year. This man, identified only with the initial W, is one of 32 fraud victims who are starting to get back a combined $336,000 US thanks to this teamwork.
其实很开心的，因为至少就是可以把部分钱拿回来，骗了大概300-400万左右，我们的一些备用金啊，还有就是房子的一些款项等等。
Exchanges say they are on the alert for suspicious transactions.
快进快出，或者是它比较有一些大额进出的话，这个的确我们在风险控制上面会去做一些参数上的调整。
But happy endings are far from typical, and even in the case of W and his fellow victims, the scammers themselves remain free. Still, some police say they're already stretched thin with scams, with tens of thousands of reports each year, and that pressure to do more is unreasonable.
赖清德总统还说，目前的成效他不是很满意，那大家还有很大的努力空间。我想这就是对所有警察人员的羞辱。
As tension builds between some police and top government officials, scammers continue stealing with impunity across Taiwan and the wider region, creating a headache for both those who make the law and those who enforce it. Fu Huahong and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
1,500 more troops are being sent to the U.S.'s border with Mexico. The additional forces will join the 2,200 already stationed there. It comes just 2 days after U.S. President Donald Trump began his crackdown on immigration. And in his first days in office, Trump signed executive orders giving authorities more power to fast-track deportation. to end birthright citizenship and to cancel all asylum processing appointments. And now this has left the future of thousands of migrants from across Central America uncertain. Many are now seeking asylum in Mexico.
Lo que pasa es que yo no puedo regresar así como tal a mi país porque yo soy perseguido político. Yo tengo problemas allá con la política y regresar a mi país es morir.
The Justice Department has also ordered the investigation of local or state authorities who interfere with these new immigration policies. Same-sex couples in Bangkok have taken part in a mass wedding on the first day marriage equality becomes the law of the land. And ahead of this historic day, LGBTQ+ couples shared their experiences and hopes for the future. Wesley Lewis reports.
A historic day for Thailand's LGBTQ+ community as marriage equality comes into effect. Hundreds of couples in Bangkok tied the knot in a mass ceremony held at a popular shopping mall, a landmark event filled with joy.
รู้สึกปลดล็อกหลายๆอย่างค่ะแล้วก็รู้สึกว่าคำว่าครอบครัวของเรามันสมบูรณ์มากยิ่งขึ้นค่ะก็รู้สึกดีใจแล้วก็มันเป็นสิ่งที่แบบว่าเหมือนกับเรามันความหวังที่เราได้รับอ่ะเหมือนกับถ้าเมื่อเราอยากกินของอะไรเราอยากได้อะไรเราได้รับมันคือความอย่างนั้นครับ
4 months ago, Thailand's parliament voted to pass the marriage equality bill, making the country the first in Southeast Asia to recognize same-sex marriages, and the third in the wider region after Taiwan and Nepal. The bill replaces all references of men and women with partner and grants same-sex couples the same legal rights as heterosexual couples. For Thai transgender woman Arya Jin Milantanapa and her American husband, Lee Ronald Batiata, marriage equality is long overdue. They have been together for over 2 decades and are raising a son from Lee's previous marriage and another son who is in Jin's custody. Ahead of their wedding, they expressed hope for their family's future.
Now we have kids and this marriage license can lead us to both party for guidance for the kids.
Just outside Bangkok, lesbian couple Carissa Fa Loivisut and Nirman Nu Kun Kao live together in their 2-story townhouse. It is difficult for unmarried couples in Thailand to buy property together, so the deed is only in Fa's name. But that can change after they're legally married.
นิวช่วยผ่อนซึ่งในความเป็นจริงนิวช่วยผ่อนนิวก็มีสิทธิ์ที่ควรจะได้มันถ้าสมมติว่ายังไม่มีพรบตรงนี้มันก็เท่ากับว่าสิ่งที่นิวผ่อนไปมันเสียเปล่าเลยนะถ้าฟ้าเกิดเป็นอะไรขึ้นมานิวก็ควรจะมีสิทธิ์ตามกฎหมายที่จะได้ในสิ่งที่เขาผ่อนมา
Now also getting hitched officially, one of the country's most high-profile gay couples, actors Sabanyu Arm Panatkul and Apiwat Porsche Apiwat Seri, known for their appearances in popular LGBT-themed TV series, known as BLs. They held their own ceremony just days ago before the law took effect. Over a decade ago, they received online backlash after the video of their proposal went viral. They say although the new marriage law coming into effect is a major milestone in Thai society, the fight for equality is not over yet.
อยากใช้คำว่าเป็นจุดเริ่มต้นของสิทธิที่พวกเราในฐานะของคนชายขอบได้รับเป็นสิทธิ์แรกๆแต่มันก็ยังไม่สิ้นสุดมันยังมีสิทธิ์อื่นๆไปอีกมันยังมีโอกาส
The couple says discrimination persists and they will continue to advocate for more anti-discrimination legislation. Among the issues still on the table, transgender rights activists are calling on the government to allow trans individuals to legally change their gender identities. And while there is still much work to be done to further ensure their equal rights, on this momentous day in Bangkok, LGBTQ+ couples are celebrating a hard-fought step forward with a grand display of love and community. Patrick Chen and Wesley Lewis for TaiwanPlus.
On January 23, 2020, Wuhan, China became the first city in the world to enter a strict lockdown over the spread of the deadly coronavirus. 5 years later, Wuhan's residents and officials are hoping to move on. Roel Hughes reports.
On the outskirts of Wuhan, China, sits a relic of the COVID-19 pandemic, an emergency field hospital, once a symbol of China's fight against the deadly virus, now empty, boarded up, and forgotten.
我感觉是往前走了，就是这样的记忆就是越来越模糊了，然后感觉，但是还是会受到这样的影响，就会觉得这几年过得比较艰难，会有一下这样的印象，但是新的生活还是开始了，我觉得是这样，
5 years ago, Wuhan's doctors flagged a SARS-like virus spreading throughout the city, traced to a local market. Within weeks, the city's population of 20 million found themselves at the epicenter of a deadly health crisis, with a virus that spread across the world, killing at least 7 million people and infecting over 700 million. On January 23, 2020, the city was the first in the world to go into lockdown, sealing itself off for 76 days. The rest of China followed in a strict zero-COVID lockdown that lasted for 2 years, the effects of which are not so easily forgotten.
就是生活上来说，大家肯定或多或少那种焦虑不安，我觉得这是一个很多人的一个常态，然后以及他这个心理变化的一个过程，对，就是都会感觉到很焦虑。
5 years later, and the streets of Wuhan are no longer desolate, as the city is once again bustling with life.
然后包括我现在，其实大家对武汉的关注也越来越多，对，然后说武汉是个英雄城市嘛，然后包括现在这几年来武汉的旅游的也越来越多了。
The city's only public commemoration of the pandemic sits next to the abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the city. A series of photos dot the wall of a nearby petrol station, faded and forgotten, just like the rest of all traces of the pandemic in Wuhan, as residents and officials look ahead. Eason Chen and Harel Hughes for TaiwanPlus.
Japan's defense ministry says it is planning to deploy surface-to-air missile units on Yonaguni Island to counter China's military threat. Japanese Defense Minister Nakatani Gen made the announcement during a visit to a military base on the island. Yonaguni is Japan's westernmost island, and it lies just 108 kilometers from Taiwan's east coast. Japan says it scrambled jets on Wednesday in response to an unpiloted Chinese aircraft that flew between Yonaguni and Taiwan. Around 31,000 people have evacuated after a new wildfire known as the Hughes Fire erupted in Los Angeles.
The Hughes Fire is now estimated to be over 9,400 acres with 0% containment, with no structures reported damaged or destroyed. We have over 4,000 firefighting personnel assigned to the incident.
2 other major fires have been raging for over 2 weeks in the greater Los Angeles area. Much of Southern California is now under a red flag warning for extreme fire risk conditions. While there have been no reported injuries in the Hughes Fire, officials remain concerned as strong winds and dry conditions are expected to worsen. It's now been 10 years since Taiwan launched an initiative to get it more attention on the international stage. The Global Cooperation and Training Framework is part of Taiwan's pushback against China's efforts to isolate it. Louise Watt reports.
Forensic scientist Wong Zhongfeng is analysing extracts from a suspect's hair. He works in the Ministry of Justice's Investigation Bureau in New Taipei City, helping gather evidence for police, which in recent years has him focused on identifying emerging designer drugs.
We have to share our ability, our knowledge to prevent this kind of drug spread out all over the world.
Now he's sharing some of that knowledge with representatives from countries in Southeast Asia, Europe, and Taiwan's diplomatic allies in Latin America. It's part of a Taiwan-US-led initiative called the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, or GCTF, that lets Taiwan have exchanges with other countries, even as it's kept out of international institutions because of pressure from China. Taiwan, the US, Japan, Australia and Canada are sharing their best practices on combating illegal drug flows and money laundering. The Foreign Ministry says events like these don't just help Taiwan share its expertise, but also deepen its partnerships with major countries. Attending the event's opening ceremony, the head of the de facto US embassy in Taipei. He says it's an important platform for Taiwan, given that China, formerly known as the People's Republic of China, or PRC, seeks to lay claim to it.
Unfortunately, the PRC has worked to keep Taiwan out of all forms of international organizations. The U.S. has long believed that Taiwan deserves a voice and deserves to participate in those organizations that are doing practical work on things like public health or law enforcement or international civil aviation issues.
There are 5 more conferences planned this year on topics including cognitive warfare and disaster relief. But some observers say that while Taiwan's government agencies get to interact with officials from many countries, the GCTF's political significance is limited.
If we take it as an example, the Southeast Asian countries, many of them have participated in GCTF activities, regardless if that's law enforcement related, different types of resiliency, or other public policy areas. But when it comes to overt support for Taiwan's participation in international organizations, Southeast Asian countries are pretty much silent.
After Wong answered questions about his lab's technology, a sign of possible future collaboration. A small win for Taiwan, which is often kept out of even such scientific exchanges because of pressure from China. Scott Huang, Justin Wu, Stacey Xu and Louise Watt for TaiwanPlus.
In sports news, a teenage Taiwanese pitcher is heading to the U.S. to join the major leagues. 18-year-old Yang Nianxi has signed for the San Francisco Giants for $500,000. Giant scouts had their eye on Yang because of his fastball, clocking in at up to 150 kilometers an hour. 2 other young Taiwanese pitchers signed MLB contracts last year. Thank you for tuning in to Taiwan Plus News this evening. I'm Eric Gao. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.